So let's continue with our causes for evolution. We just talked about natural selection. Now we're going to move on to mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift. So evolution can happen by mutation. Now mutations cause a change in the genetic makeup of an individual, and a mutation with respect to evolution is going to be any change to that DNA that affects the phenotype of an individual. Remember that we can have mutations that are neutral that don't do anything. So we're looking for a change in phenotype. The reason that mutation is going to cause evolution is that mutations can cause new alleles. So the presence of a new allele in a population is going to change the frequency by making another option. Now, of course, that allele can become more frequent depending on what other mechanisms might be happening. But mutation in itself is going to cause changes in allele frequencies by producing new mutations or by changing one allele to another. So we can also have one phenotype changed to another, and that can affect the frequency as well. Now, mutation is probably the least likely of the mechanisms of evolution to happen. The reason is that in a large population, mutations are probably going to have negligible effects. Now, that's not to say they can't have monumental effects, that something new and great can't come up, because they absolutely can. But if you have a large population, the chance of mutation is really small, and the chance of that mutation causing an effect on the overall allele frequency is going to be small as well. But when you have small populations, mutations may have a bigger effect on that population. So we can't assume that mutations are not having an effect. They're just probably the least likely of all of the other mechanisms to be occurring. Our next mechanism is called gene flow. Now we can think of gene flow as immigration or emigration. In other words, organisms moving in or out of a population. Now the reason that gene flow causes evolution is that when individuals move in, they bring their alleles with them. Now these might be new traits, new variations, or they might be the same variations that are already present, but are now present in different frequencies because individuals have come in or individuals have moved out and taken those alleles with them. So gene flow is really important because it helps to maintain diversity in a population. It helps to sort of have genetic continuity between multiple populations. And gene flow can help reduce differences between populations. But anytime individuals are moving in or out, they're going to be changing the allele frequencies in the population. So this image here is not from our textbook, it's from a genetics textbook, but I think it's an interesting image because it shows the flow of blood types from Eastern Europe and Asia into Western Europe. And if I remember correctly, this is the AB positive blood type. I forgot to double check. I think this is the AB positive blood type moving in from Eastern Europe and from Asia. And you can see that whichever blood type this happens to be, the frequency is higher farther to the east and lower farther to the west. And as individuals moved and began to interbreed with the local populations, it began to pull that blood type farther and farther to the west. Now down in Spain and sort of more southern Europe, you can see that the frequency of this blood type is the lowest, but it's still present, and that's because it has come in from the east. Our last mechanism is genetic drift. Now, there are two different ways to think about genetic drift. Genetic drift is essentially a chance event that affects a population. And this event has no regard to what allele you are studying, what allele frequency you're looking at for evolutionary purposes. So genetic drift is fluctuation in allele frequency due to chance. Now there's many things that could cause this. A natural disaster could cause this. An individual getting hit on the road or just by chance doesn't find a mate. So there's lots of things that can cause genetic drift to happen. And when genetic drift happens, allele frequencies are fluctuating unpredictably from one generation to the next with no regard to the allele that we're thinking about. Sometimes this one is called large population size. Now the reason that this is called large population size is that when a population is large, chance events are less likely to have an effect on that population. So if you have a large population, let's say you have 10,000 individuals and one of them gets hit by a car, it's actually not going to change your allele frequencies very much. And it's probably going to have no effect whatsoever on the overall population. But let's say you have 10 individuals and one of them gets hit by a car. Well, now you have removed 10% of the alleles from your population, and that is very likely to affect the overall allele frequencies. So chance events are more likely to affect a small population than a large population. This image on the bottom shows chance events. So I like to think of this as a beautiful woodland prairie with some lovely wildflowers. And let's say that there's a moose walking through this prairie and or meadow. It would be a meadow, I'm sorry, a meadow if there's a moose. And this moose is walking along and he's looking for some nice grass. Well, maybe these lovely little flowers are popping up through the grass, but he's not interested in those guys. He's interested in the grass surrounding them. And so he tromps all over the flowers. So from one generation, we've got higher proportion of red plants and a low proportion of yellow. And let's say that he walks through and he kills some of those red plants. Well, now there's more room for those white plants and there's less red. So in the next generation, just by chance, nothing to do with those flowers themselves, the red is less frequent and the white is more frequent. Let's say in the next spring, a whole bunch of moose trample through and come right up here through the middle and take out everybody but those red ones on the outside. Well, the next generation, we're going to have red flowers. Not because the moose were trying to kill the flowers or because they love the red ones, but just because they happen to trample over all of these others. So genetic drift is simply change due to chance. It's like the luck of the draw. It's like throwing dice. There are two specific types of genetic drift that can affect population other than just plain old chance events, being at the wrong place at the wrong time. The first is the founder effect. So the founder effect is when some individuals start a new population where there was no population before, and just by chance, the gene frequencies are different from the parent population. Now, let's say that these are British settlers who are traveling to this island and establish a small colony on this place called Tristan da Cunha. It's down here between South America and Africa. And on this island, a group of less than 20 settlers established a little population here. And these individuals, one of them carried a recessive allele for blindness. Now, let's say that is less than 5% of the, or that is approximately 5% of their population. That is just by chance higher than the percentage of this blindness allele in Europe itself. And so by chance, when that one individual of that group of 20 original settlers came to this island with that allele for blindness, now this population has a higher percentage than the original population, just by chance. So the gene frequencies of the new established population differ from the parent population. A second type of genetic drift is known as the bottleneck effect. So the bottleneck effect is when there is a sudden and unexpected reduction in population size. Now, this is something that we're seeing quite frequently with global warming because organisms are not having time to adapt to the change in temperatures. We're also seeing it because of deforestation and habitat loss. Groups of organisms are becoming separated from the rest of their populations, and they're dying off very quickly. So in a very short amount of time, a large number of individuals are lost from the population. Now, this has nothing to do with whatever allele you happen to be looking at for evolution, for your evolution studies. So just by chance, when that quick reduction in population size happens, certain alleles may be lost or the frequencies changed compared to before that reduction in population size. Now, this is a big problem because remember I said that small populations are more susceptible to random effects of genetic drift. So usually with bottleneck effect, not only do we have a quick reduction in size and a potential for changing the allele frequencies, but now that we have a small population, we can get genetic drift. And genetic drift can cause further evolution in a population. Bottleneck effect is also really important for species loss because it can reduce genetic variation among individuals. So some alleles might simply be lost. And if you look at this picture up in the top, excuse me, you have this population that has blue, white, and yellow alleles. There's a quick reduction in population size, and all of a sudden that yellow allele is lost. So we see this happening in a lot of endangered species. For example, the puma there on the top right, the greater prairie chicken, the Illinois greater prairie chicken on the left. These are both examples of population that experienced a dramatic population size reduction that resulted in low genetic variation. Now, when individuals have low genetic variation in small populations, they start inbreeding, and that causes even more problems for an already susceptible population. So another mechanism that can potentially affect a population is random mating, or